All right, welcome back. Onto our developing story this morning. Suspended ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule has served Luthuli House with court papers challenging the constitutionality of the so-called step-aside resolution that resulted in his suspension. Let's get a perspective now. Let's get some analysis and bring in political analyst Dr Ralph Mathekga. He's on the line for us. Dr. Mathekga, thank you very much indeed for your time. Do we have Dr. Mathekga?
Yes, I'm on the line.
All right.
Good morning to your viewers.
No, thank you very much indeed for making the time. We need some perspective on this story. Firstly, your reaction to this legal challenge.
Well, it's quite surprising for those who expected an apology, and it will hit them hard, because not only are they not getting an apology from Mr. Magashule, but this amounts to an escalation. And if you look at Magashule's view on this and how he has carried himself, this is quite consistent, because he has always maintained that the manner in which the resolution is being implemented by the NEC is quite arbitrary, and it is to target him. And he's now showing that he's even willing to test that theory outside the ANC through the court system. At the end of the day, we are now back in a situation where the ANC's internal processes are going to be subject to the court's review, subject to the court's processes. It shows that the ANC seems to be losing control of its own members. Members of the ANC no longer trust the internal processes, and now it is the most senior member who is demonstrating this behavior, that is Mr. Magashule.
Politically, where does this leave Mr. Magashule within the party? What sort of options does he have?
Well, it orchestrates chaos. It actually says that the NEC cannot deal with this matter. And when you actually go outside the NEC, you are actually daring the party to expel you. And my view here is that an expulsion of Magashule, it is the type of escalation that he would want, because if you expel a member who is a national office bearer, he's been elected by the branches at the national conference, you are actually asking the branches to come and weigh in on his expulsion. Remember, his trying cut, it is actually to test this thing with the branches, and he's trying by all means to remove it from the purview of the NEC, orchestrate this chaos to a point where it will come down to the branches of the ANC.
You know, we recently, SABC recently had a sit-down interview with Mr. Magashule, and when asked simply, do you hate President Cyril Ramaphosa, he said, and I want to quote him verbatim here, he says, why would I hate President Ramaphosa when I and Zweli Mkhize and David Mabuza and Sishle, he says, and Comrade Nombula, we brought him in 2012. He said he is not part of any faction. He doesn't fluctuate. He remains principled and respects all presidents. Give us some context to the statement.
The first part of the answer is not far from the truth, because indeed in 2012 that is how President Ramaphosa got back. President Ramaphosa got back because of a vote against the then Motlanthe, who was actually campaigning to lead the ANC against President Jacob Zuma. So Mr. Magashule was part of a faction that actually brought Mr. Ramaphosa back into the party. He did not understand his conduct as within a faction, as he's saying. That is his own view. But clearly, that is the faction that wanted to vote against Motlanthe for challenging President Jacob Zuma. That's how President Ramaphosa came about. I think that is nearly indisputable. Remember as well, President Ramaphosa came at the backdrop of expulsion of a seemingly belligerent youth league, the then belligerent youth league member, Mr. Julius Malema by then, who was expelled from the party. And now this is coming to bite Mr. Magashule. It appears that he seems to feel that the person whose political career he seems to have carved recently, he seems to have paved a path for, that is President Ramaphosa, it's now going after him. It is clearly a faction. I don't think anyone within the ANC is willing to pretend that factions no longer exist. The factions exist is very clear now.
So what could be the next move from the ANC's top six, and in particular the president of the governing party?
I think they have to be very careful. Mr. Magashule is escalating, and they need to be careful not to be baited into escalating, because if they escalate this thing further, on their side, the most reasonable thing to do now, it might be expelling Mr. Magashule. And if you expel that, you are really going to trigger a mutiny across the branches. And if the branches call for a special conference, it might end up being used as a referendum on this decision and on the current leadership of the ANC. They don't want that. Perhaps they might have to sit through court, sit through these processes and not necessarily expel him. Because if you expel him, remember, he's no longer going to live by the rules of the party. He's out there. He can address the branches on his own and so forth. We cannot do anything. We cannot sanction him. So that is the balance that they have to work on, is to make sure that they do not escalate it to a point where he indeed looked victimized.
This is what he also said in that interview with the SABC. He said in summary, he said that the ANC has been factionalized. He said that the resolution of the ANC has been factionalized, and there are these dominant people who think they are the ANC. Where does this leave the party in the public's eye?
I mean, the party is at a crossroads. The reality is that the party has to show that it takes it is resolute on corruption, to fight against corruption. And unfortunately, the party has allowed its position on corruption to rest on this single issue of Magashule. They have to expedite this issue. And the way in which I see it, I do not see any point of compromise regarding Magashule. It is becoming increasingly difficult to imagine Mr. Magashule and the president of the ANC, Mr. Ramaphosa, compromising on this issue. It appears the ANC is going to have to proceed and deal with the consequences, which could be a major fallout. But they've allowed themselves. Imagine what would have happened had they implemented this resolution from the get-go. They would have saved their own members from having to deal with this. It will have possibly deterred even future conduct of corruption. But they sat on it to a point where they have no other option and to implement it in a way that it is causing all this within the party. They have allowed themselves to be pushed to the corner, unfortunately.
Interesting perspective. Political analyst Dr. Ralph Mathekga, we thank you very much indeed for your time. Be well.
Thank you so much.
All right, we will no doubt continue to give you developments around this story. Stay